You're listening to episode number 50 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today's episode, it's all about you. And that's because back in February, I sent out a survey to the LHT community, and over 200 of you responded, and wow, did you have questions? You wanted to know about the best ways to plan healthy meals for your family. You wanted tips for getting your kids, even those independent teenagers, to eat more vegetables. You wanted dinner ideas that could do double duty, pleasing the vegetarians at your table and the meat eaters. And a lot of you were really eager for advice on how to cut sugar from your kids' diet. So you asked, and I have the answers. Now, to help me out today, I have invited my intern, Dan, onto the podcast. He's a grad student at Boston University, so he's here to interview yours truly. So instead of me just blabbing at you the whole time, I figured I'll have Dan come on, and then he could ask those questions. So I have a lot of ideas for you today and lots of resources. And instead of you getting out a pen and paper and taking notes, you could just go over to lizshealthytable.com/podcast, over to show number 50. Can you believe it? Show number 50. And on the show notes, I'll give you links to the recipes and the resources that I share with you today. Liz's Healthy Table is brought to you by my friends at superhealthykids.com, your one-stop shop for recipes, meal plans, cooking videos, and tips for feeding kids, including teens, of all ages. My show is also brought to you by the Parents on Demand Network. This is an app that is filled with parenting podcasts covering everything from nutrition and feeding kids to pregnancy and raising toddlers. You can check out the app and their lineup of shows over at parentsondemand.com. Dan, my intern extraordinaire, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me on. Very exciting.
Very exciting. And Dan, you're really good at audio. That's kind of like one of your little specialties. So the backstory, so everybody can just hear it first, is that Dan and I recorded this podcast, and for whatever reason, Dan's audio came through, and after like 45 minutes on the call, we realized, oh, there's no Liz audio. So anyway, we're doing it all over again. So you better be really good. Take two, and you better be really good, Dan, or else. You're in big trouble.
Or else. Oh, okay.
Or else you get a D-. No, only good marks from Liz. So Dan, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm originally from New York, and I've always been interested in nutrition since I was in high school. I was always an athlete, so that was a big part of my life. And I decided to go to Boston for school for nutrition. And part of that experience is working with a dietitian. And I saw that Liz had a spot for an intern. I have a lot of skills in media, like audio, video editing, lots of creative stuff, which has always been a huge part of my life. So I thought it'd be a good fit. And here I am on Liz's podcast.
Here you are. And I could see that audio is actually being recorded. So, God.
Great.
It's always something, we do our best. That's all I'm going to say. We do our best. So we had this survey, and Dan actually helped me create the survey, and over 200 people took it, which was phenomenal. We got a lot of questions. So I thought, hey, let's just do a podcast called Nutrition Q&A. So Dan's going to ask your questions, and I'm going to answer them. So Dan, why don't we get into question number one? Sure.
So Liz, our first question is from Anna, and she just wants to know, what are the 5 easiest things you could do to have a healthy diet?
So that could be a whole show, but actually, let's just look at the USDA's MyPlate. And MyPlate, they've had it for a couple of years, more than a couple of years now, but it's this tool that if you look at it visually, you can really get an immediate sense for what a healthy diet should be. So half of your plate, Anna, should be filled with fruits and vegetables. So as you're preparing meals for your family, half your plate, fruits and veggies. Well, what's on the other half? So if tip number 1 is half your plate should be fruits and veggies, tip number 2 is that a quarter of your plate should be lean protein. And that lean protein can be seafood, it can be chicken, pork, lean ground beef, beef being a superb source of iron and calcium and B vitamins. It can be tofu, beans, legumes, eggs. So lots of options for protein. And then that third component is grains. So a quarter of that plate should be grains. So when we think of grains, we think of rice, we think of pasta, we think of couscous, all these different grains. Half of those should be whole grains. So don't freak out if they're not all whole grains, but make half of them whole grains. And then your fourth component of a healthy diet is hydration. We often forget about hydration. You should be drinking a lot of water. But other beverages can be things like 100% fruit juice. Just don't overjuice your kids, because 2 things can happen. If your kids drink too much juice, they either end up consuming more calories than they need, or they get so full that they don't eat their meals. And so you're displacing good nutrition with juice. So a little bit of juice is fine. And then milk. Milk is so rich in calcium and protein, or the milk alternatives, like there's almond milk and there's oat milk and those different milks. You just want to make sure they're calcium fortified. So hydration is important. And then finally, omega-3 fatty acids. I'm going to get into this a little bit later on the podcast, but these are essential fats that you find mostly in things like seafood. And good fats like omega-3s are good for the brain, the heart, and your eyes. So you want to have those good fats in your diet. And other good fats are the monounsaturated fats that you'll find in things like olive oil and in things like nuts and avocados. So the good fats can be part of that healthy diet. All right, next question.
So Liz, I know that I don't have a lot of time, and lots of people don't have a lot of time to cook, and that can lead to a lot of quick, not necessarily healthy meals. So a big theme in the questions was what to do for healthy and quick meals for dinner.
Yeah, this dinner dilemma, right? It's a big one. And so let me give you a couple tips here. Build your own nights. And when I say build your own meal nights, that would be like build your own pizza, build your own tacos, build your own protein bowls or nourish bowls, Buddha bowls. They come by many different names. And when you do these build your own nights, it takes a lot of the stress out of dinner, because you just put out a bunch of ingredients and let everybody create their own. And so it's very participatory and it's really fun for families. So if it's build your own pizza night, you might have a bunch of whole wheat pitas that you set out, and then everybody can top them with different ingredients. So maybe you've got a little pasta sauce, you've got some low-fat shredded cheese, maybe you sauteed up some onions and mushrooms and peppers, maybe you've got some leftover chicken that you chopped up. And so before you know it, everybody creates their own pizza, and you're all laughing and having a good time. And so that's a really great, easy way to get dinner on the table. Something else you could do is think about having eggs more often. And I say eggs because, we think of eggs as like a breakfast food, but eggs can be really great for dinner. You could scramble up eggs and add some black beans, and you've got like a little scrambled egg filling for tacos. You can have omelets that you fill with low-fat shredded cheese and sauteed baby spinach. You can make pancakes with eggs and have those for dinner. So eggs are a great source of protein and important nutrients like choline. And choline is hard to get in the diet, and it's important for brain health. So I'm a huge fan of eggs. And then rotisserie chicken. What can be easier, right? You buy that rotisserie chicken, and then you could turn it into a number of things. You can slice it and just have the chicken with, say, roasted vegetables and potatoes for dinner. You can turn it into chicken salad. You can add it to soups, so that one rotisserie chicken becomes the basis for so many dinner possibilities. So there's just a couple of quick tips for dinner.
Liz, what about meal planning and prep? Do you have any tips about that? Personally, I'm not the greatest, so I definitely want to know your answer to this.
Okay. So meal planning, and I always say I was not born with the organized gene. I kind of fly by the seat of my pants a little bit. And
I'm with you there.
Yeah. And so and I'm sure half of our listeners are too. And so I actually just did a blog post on this. I have 30 meal planning tips. I'm going to give you a link to this in the show notes, but 30 tips, people. So let me give you a few meal planning tips. Now, we know when you have no plan, sometimes it gets in the way of relaxation and it gets in the way of good nutrition because you're just like frantically throwing things together. But if you have a plan, you're more likely to serve your family a nutritious diet. So Jessica Levinson is the author of the 52-week meal planner. She was a guest on my Dinner Dilemmas podcast a few months ago. So I'm going to give you a link to that show, and I highly encourage you to tune in. But Jessica's a big believer in sort of sitting down each week with your kids, preferably, and coming up with a plan. So you can go through cookbooks and websites and magazines and just come up with a bunch of recipes that look good and then just start to write things down. I actually have a 7-day meal planner. It's a freebie on my website, so I encourage you to download that and kind of use that as your template and start to fill it in. And you can leave room for leftovers, certainly, but you might, on that meal plan, start writing in, I'm going to have lasagna on Monday, we're having make your own pizzas on Wednesday, and before you know it, you've filled it out. And then just go around your kitchen and look around, like, what do I have in my pantry? What do I have in my freezer? What do I need to buy at the supermarket to achieve this meal plan? And then you can download my aisle by aisle supermarket shopping list, another freebie, fill it out. And then when you head to the grocery store, you end up buying only what you need, which is a great way to save money and cut back on food waste. So by just sitting down like that one day a week, you suddenly start to get a lot more organized. And then the other thing that you can do, and this is another podcast that I had on meal prep, and I had Toby Amador on that podcast. And so by meal prep, Toby talks about setting aside like one day a week when you do the lion's share of the prep. So if you go shopping on a Sunday morning, maybe when the stores are kind of quiet, when you get home, you immediately start prepping everything. And you can, add things to a slow cooker and kind of get a slow cooker meal going. You could start slicing and dicing veggies for the week. Maybe bell peppers are going into a stir fry on a Wednesday. So by doing a lot of that prepping and putting things in Ziplocs and containers in the fridge, you just take so much of the stress away from dinner as the week progresses. So check out that blog post for sure, because those 30 tips, and Dan, you read that today. You read that whole post.
Yeah, it's a long post, but there's a lot of good info in there.
Yeah, it's like something for everybody, right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, what's next? Next question.
Liz, this next question is about vegetables and making them more tasty for teenagers. Teenagers don't seem to get as much as they should. So a reader wants to know, how can they feed vegetables to their teenager in a way that they'll like it?
Yeah. We did a blog post on this too recently because of this question. And, we always think that toddlers are picky, but get this statistic. I hope you're sitting down, people. Only 2% of teens consume the recommended amount of vegetables each day. 2%.
I believe it.
Yeah. I don't know what you see on the college campus, but I bet you don't see a lot of like carrots. You probably see a lot of chips, right?
It's horrifying.
Really?
Yeah. Oh. People are putting in their mouths on the dining halls and things like that.
Ooh. Wow. And these are like, 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
Yeah, they're eating like toddlers, which is not, a slam against toddlers. But I think once you become a young adult, you should be eating like a young adult in terms of your nutrition.
Yeah. Well, remember, you're a dietitian too.
Yeah, I'm a bit of an outlier, I guess.
You're like me. You're a little nerdy. But at the same time, if you see young adults and teenagers and they're just eating junk food all day, they're really missing out on so many important nutrients. And teens need between 2 and 3 cups of vegetables each day. So in the blog post, I actually shot a little video. And in the video, I talk about 3 really quick and easy things you can do to encourage your teenagers to eat more veggies and to choose them like when they're on their own. And that is dipping. So you could set out a bunch of different dips and a bunch of veggies. And so crunchy veggies like carrot sticks and bell pepper strips and cucumber wheels, just slice them into little rounds. And then dips. It could be hummus. Hummus is made with beans, with chickpeas. It could be a bean dip. My friends at Bush's Beans actually have this little ready-made bean dip you can buy now. And so, boom, you're just dipping right there. So it's double dipping in a sense because you're dipping in the veggies and beans are a veggie. So you get the beans and you get your vegetables. Double dip. And so the dipping is great. and guacamole certainly is another favorite. You can roast veggies, and when you roast them, it brings out the natural sweetness. They caramelize. So roasted cauliflower florets and broccoli florets and butternut squash that's diced up. Super yummy. And then quesadillas. Like, I think teenagers love quesadillas. So you can saute up a bunch of veggies. It could be onions and bell peppers and mushrooms, you name it. And you add those to like flour tortillas. So you lay out your flour tortillas. You fill half with your sauteed veggies, a little bit of shredded cheese, black beans. I love canned beans. Add those and then just fold them over. And then just saute them in a skillet, and you get like these cheesy, gooey, veggie-filled quesadillas. Very teen-friendly. So we don't want to be horrified by our teenagers. We want them eating lots of vegetables. And you know what? They'll feel better if they eat lots of veggies.
Oh, yeah. I definitely feel better when I eat a little cleaner.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling when you do. Mm-hmm. So our next question is about carbs. A few people wanted to know, how do we wean kids off carbs if they're eating too many?
So yeah, I know we got a lot of questions about weaning kids off of carbs. So let me just back up and say that carbohydrates are really important because carbohydrates give us energy. The problem is that a lot of kids consume too many carbohydrates and not enough fruits and veggies and lean proteins and all those other good things we want them to eat. So when parents say carbs, I think they're thinking of sort of that beige food diet, which is that bowl of sugary cereal for breakfast and the sandwich and chips or pretzels for lunch, and then the pizza for a snack, and then the mac and cheese for dinner. And before you know it, they've only eaten carbs. So some carbs are good, and we certainly want carbs for energy, but carbs also come with a lot of good nutrition. So whole wheat bread is a carbohydrate. Fruits and vegetables technically are carbohydrates. Beans and legumes like lentils contain a lot of carbohydrates. These are complex carbohydrates. So they contain fiber. I'm a huge fan of fiber. And they contain important nutrients like vitamin E and selenium when it comes to especially the whole grains. When you think about the refined grains, which is what I think our listeners and survey takers are talking about, when we think of refined grains, we're thinking about like the white bread. I just want you to realize that there are some good things about refined grains. I mean, yes, a refined grain has lost some of its nutrients because you have stripped away some of the components of that whole grain. It might be the bran or the germ. So when you lose some of those nutrients, it's things like fiber. Well, manufacturers are required to add back certain nutrients to refined grains. So if half of your grains are whole grains and half are refined, bear in mind that the refined grains will contain folic acid, which is added back in. And that's really important for pregnant women, especially because it reduces their risk of neural tube defects with their child, with their baby. Iron is added back to refined grains and refined cereals. And so a lot of kids are getting a lot of iron, which is great, right? We don't want iron deficiency anemia, certainly with our kids. So we're getting iron from some of those refined grains. So now that I've sort of put that in perspective, I will say, again, half your grains should be whole grains. And then when you do eat carbohydrate foods, make sure they go hand in hand with a lot of good nutrition. So if you have mac and cheese for dinner, maybe you can add some peas to the mac and cheese, or you could have a big salad on the side. If you're having pizza, top it with tons of cooked veggies, sauteed veggies. If you're having pasta, add a lot of veggies to it. And so you're using the carbohydrate as part of the meal, but not the entire meal. So yeah, go for those complex carbohydrates. And then think about things like hummus. I mean, if you look at hummus on the label, you'll see that there's more carbohydrate in hummus than there is protein. But what a great package of nutrients in hummus, right? It's made with chickpeas, again, made with beans. So carbs are not bad. Carbs are a really important part of the diet. You just don't want to make it like the overwhelming part of your diet. So I hope that helped. I know that was like a long explanation, but I do think carbohydrate foods tend to confuse people. And then as far as the really refined carbs, like the pies and the cakes, yeah, and the big old muffins where there's like just white flour, I can see that those are the things you want to cut back on. But a sandwich made with 2 beautiful slices of artisanal white bread with all sorts of great things in between that sandwich, I think it's a good thing. So yeah, it's just how you package it.
Liz, this next question has to do with something that I've definitely noticed. It seems like kids are always snacking. So our readers want to know, do kids really need snacks?
That's such a fun question because it makes me think of my dad. And when my boys were really young, my dad would always say, these boys are snacking all the time. Why are they always eating? They don't need all these snacks. And you girls didn't snack like this when you were growing up. And that's really true. I mean, the food choices we had in the 70s, like, hello, there wasn't all this prepared food at the market. So, yeah, we pretty much just ate our 3 square meals a day, and that was it. So, yes.
You say you had lame snacks?
We had lame snacks. We had pretty much no snacks. Yeah, I'm a little older than you, Dan. I mean, I remember when the ice cream man used to come down the street and with a little Dixie cup of ice cream.
Oh, no. He would give us huge portions, like these big faces. They'd be cartoon character faces made out of ice cream.
Oh, like a SpongeBob situation.
Yeah, that's the classic one. Everyone goes for the SpongeBob. At least I did.
That my boys, yeah, the same thing. Like the ice cream man, like the whole vibe is different today than when I was a kid. Yeah. But yeah, suffice it to say, we did not snack a lot. But get this statistic. According to the Hartman Group, they do a lot of cool research. They found that 50% of all eating occasions in this country are snacks, which means people are snacking all the time. So if your kids are snacking, think of the snack not as an opportunity to eat chips and empty calories, but as an opportunity to hold your kid over between meals. So just give them a little something so they're not like frantic and exhausted and crying because they're so hungry, right? Just a little something to hold them over. But also think of it as a mini meal to fill in the nutrient gaps in their day. So if your child is just not getting enough of those vegetables, then maybe veggies and dip is a great snack in the morning. Or if your child is just for whatever reason not getting enough fresh fruit, then a beautiful fruit smoothie when they get home from school to hydrate them and to fill in those nutrient gaps is a great idea. So make those snacks count for good nutrition. And, as far as snacks go, I love hard-boiled eggs. I love slices of apple with peanut butter for dipping. I love cheese and whole grain crackers. I love tuna fish. You could make tuna salad with some shredded carrot and then add it onto little slices of cucumber. Sounds fancy, but it's really easy to make, and you get the crunchy cucumber and you get this yummy tuna, and then your kids are getting more seafood in their diet. So that's a great little snack to give them when they get home from school. So I'm a big fan of snacking as long as you're a smart snacker.
What about desserts? Is it okay to eat them? I know that some of our readers, Megan, Jessica, and Dawn, want to know about some lower sugar options for desserts.
Yeah. Sugar that's a big conundrum for parents. We definitely got a lot of questions about that, right, on the survey. So I did a podcast with Laura Hoover about a year ago on sugar, and how to cut sugar from your diet. So I'll give you guys a link to that, and I encourage you to listen to that one. So just to put sugar in perspective, health experts recommend that no more than 10% of our daily calories come from added sugar. I'm not talking about the sugar naturally found in fruit. I'm talking about added sugar. So if you're consuming 2,000 calories, 10% of that is 200 calories. And I'll tell you that a teaspoon of sugar has 16 calories. So if you divide 200 by 16, you come up with 12.5 teaspoons. So that adult can consume up to 12 and a half teaspoons of added sugar. That actually sounds a little high to me. But if you look at kiddos and they're consuming, say, 1,000 calories a day, well, then if you do the math, you come out with 6 teaspoons of added sugar. Now, if your child is drinking a soft drink with 10 or more teaspoons of sugar, you kind of blown through that very quickly. So I would say across the board, get the soft drinks and the sugary juice drinks, the Faco drinks, out of the diet, because those are just full of sugar and you really end up consuming them mindlessly. So that's like my first number one tip is get rid of those sugary drinks. But also, when you're baking, like I love to bake, and I'm a big believer that a little bit of sugar can really go a long way. So if you're baking muffins and there's some sugar in there, but you've also added mashed banana or blueberries or whole wheat flour, like you're getting good stuff. So if you're consuming sugar, make sure there's good stuff along with it. And if a recipe calls for a cup of sugar, you can probably cut it to 3/4 or 2/3 of a cup without messing up your recipe. So cut back on the added sugar in your recipes a little bit too. And then go for natural sweetness. So I have this recipe on my blog. It's for a mango soft serve, and it's made with frozen mango, cottage cheese, or you could use Greek yogurt, plain Greek yogurt, and frozen banana that I slice up. And you blend it all up, and it comes out like this frozen fruity whip. And so I love that. And so you could add a little bit of honey or agave, or you can leave it out. So that's naturally sweet. It satisfies the sweet tooth, but you're not adding sugar to it. And then I love parfaits. So you can make a parfait with fresh fruit, plain Greek yogurt. So not the vanilla, not the strawberry, just the plain. You're getting the sweetness from the fruit. And then you could add your favorite granola and some chopped nuts. So make a parfait. Not a lot of sugar added, just a little bit from the cereal perhaps, and all that sweetness from that fresh fruit.
Liz, you didn't warn me about how hungry this podcast would make me.
I know, especially because we're recording it now for the second time in a row.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel it, and all this talk about granola and desserts is making me a little crazy.
Well, I do have, Dan, I will treat you to this dark chocolate covered caramel. I have these little caramels that I buy, and I could eat like 10 of them, but I limit myself to one because the quality is so good, and I love dark chocolate. And I cut the little caramels into little pieces, and then I just sit, like Tim will just pop the whole thing in his mouth. I just sit and eat like one little piece after the other, and I savor it. And when you do that, it makes that dessert kind of stretch out. And I don't want that instant gratification. I want to extend it. So you could have that good quality chocolate. So I will give you one after the podcast.
I'm very excited.
Okay.
So Liz, our next reader question is about omega-3 fatty acids. They want to know how much should we get each day and if we should take a supplement.
Yeah, and I did talk about omega-3s at the top of the show. So there's 3 types of omega-3 in the diet. And the first kind is found in seafood. That's the most potent kind of omega-3. And that is, you might see it like on supplement labels, or you might have heard about EPA and DHA. Those are abbreviations. I'm not going to even give you the real names because they're just too long. And I know I'll always mispronounce them anyway. So in seafood, like fatty fish, salmon, tuna, mackerel, sardines, you get this EPA and DHA. And these fats, these omega-3 fats, are so good for your heart and your eyes and your brain. And you want to get about at least 500 milligrams a day of EPA and DHA. So if you're having seafood twice a week, that should cover your bases. Most people don't, though, okay? But that's why you hear that recommendation. The other kind of omega-3 is called ALA. And ALA is found in non-seafood sources, so like walnuts and flaxseed and soy foods like edamame. And ALA, in order for it to work in your body, has to be converted to EPA and DHA. And your body does that for you. You don't have to think about it. But it's not very efficient. Only like 5 or 10% of it gets converted. So it's not as powerful. Okay? So if you're a vegetarian, you're not going to benefit from the powerful EPA and DHA that I get when I eat salmon. But you can take a supplement. And so if you're not getting seafood twice a week, or if you're a vegetarian, you can take a supplement. And I'd aim for 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA combined each day just to cover your bases. And you could take an algae supplement if you're a vegetarian. You could take a fish oil supplement if you're a fish eater. So EPA, DHA, ALA, really important for your health. And food first, always food first, but there may be room in your diet for a supplement. Certainly talk to your doctor, your dietitian. Always talk to your healthcare professional before you take supplements.
Liz, the next question I think is one that's going to resonate with a lot of moms out there with younger kids. But one of our readers wants to know about a healthy substitute for chicken fingers.
For chicken fingers. All right. Well, I'm going to give a plug to a recipe I have on the blog for salmon sticks. Instead of fish sticks or chicken fingers, it's made with salmon, and the breading is made with Parmesan cheese. And I create this really yummy avocado dipping sauce, kind of like a guacamole on the side. And so I'd say go for the fish fingers made with salmon as like your number one challenge. But I also have a recipe on the website for this like no fry fried chicken, and I make it with boneless, skinless chicken breast. But you could definitely make it with chicken tenders, and it's this cornflake coating super yummy and crunchy and delicious. So you can make that, just sort of adapt that recipe so that the chicken fingers that you're making at home become healthier because of this healthy breading. And then if you do buy like frozen chicken fingers or chicken nuggets, just read labels. And I always advise going for the product with the most protein and the least amount of sodium. And what that means is that you're getting the most chicken in there, real chicken, and then it's not as processed, so maybe there's not as much breading, and that's kind of where the lower sodium comes in. So be a little bit of a comparison label reader if you are going to buy the frozen products.
So our next question is about fermented foods. A reader wants to know how they can get their family to eat more of them. I personally really like kimchi and other fermented foods like that, but I know maybe some younger kids wouldn't really be into it. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, and I'm not really a kimchi lover either. I always find that it's really garlicky, but I know there's like a lot of different types of kimchis out there, right? Like you go to a Korean restaurant, like you're a big fan, right? Yeah,
no, there's a lot of varieties you can get. It's not always the same vegetables. I think there are some kind of standbys that a lot of the restaurants do, but sometimes they can get weird with it, and it's really fun to try.
You like weird, right? Weird's good.
Yes, weird is good.
So we've got kimchi, which is this Korean vegetable dish that's fermented, a fresh sauerkraut that's fermented, yogurt, kefir or kefir, however you pronounce it, that's a fermented food. And so why would you want to add fermented foods to the diet? Well, if you listened to my probiotics show, parts 1 and 2, you would have learned that fermented foods contain good bacteria. And good bacteria that you consume help to keep your gut in good health. And so we want to be eating foods rich in good bacteria, certainly. How do you get your family to love them? Well, you can add kefir to smoothies. My boys actually just like it straight up. It's a little sour tasting, so you could add it to fruit smoothies. You could eat yogurt, certainly. You can add sauerkraut to sandwiches. So I love the idea of making like corned beef sandwiches with a little Russian dressing, maybe a little bit of Swiss cheese and some fresh sauerkraut and turn that into a panini. I think that would be seriously yummy. And I will say on sauerkraut, if you're buying canned or jarred off the shelf sauerkraut, that will not have the good bacteria in it because those are cooked products and the cooking kills the good bacteria. So it's fresh sauerkraut you want to be looking for in the refrigerator section of the supermarket. So that's my spiel on fermented foods.
So this next question kind of hurts my heart. I feel bad for the reader who asked this, but I'm sure it's pretty common. They can't digest dairy and want to know how they can get enough calcium in their diet.
So yeah, the dairy thing. I have a very good friend who does not consume dairy because she says she gets congested when she consumes it. I'm like you, Dan. I love dairy. I'm like a huge yogurt fan. I have to have my milk and my coffee in the morning. So for people who cannot consume dairy, there's this question of how do I get calcium in my diet because, you need calcium for strong bones and other body functions. And so I would say number one is to go for the calcium fortified foods. And that might be a calcium fortified orange juice or a calcium fortified soy milk or almond milk or oat milk. And, normally we want to consume like 3 glasses of milk a day to get about 1,000 milligrams of calcium. So you might have, 3 glasses of some fortified beverage each day, or maybe you're consuming some other foods that contain calcium, like broccoli or cooked kale or almonds. Sardines with the bones, that's a really good source of calcium. Like the vegetable sources aren't going to be as high, but something like canned sardines with the bones or a canned salmon with the bones, you can get a lot of calcium that way. And then, to cover your bases, you might want to talk to your doctor or your dietitian about taking a calcium supplement. I've done those little chocolate chews that you can get because I love the dark chocolate. And so I will often take like a 500 milligram supplement just to kind of cover my bases.
So our next reader question is from Linda, and she wants to know how she can cook with less salt and instead use spices. I'm sure this is going to be a popular question for a lot of people looking to spice it up.
Spice it up. Indeed. So if you look at, I've always been amazed at things like taco seasoning, because sometimes you could buy that already in a package at the supermarket. And the taco seasoning, you think, oh, this is convenient. I'll just sprinkle this on my ground beef or turkey, when I'm making tacos for the family. Those are so salty. You don't need them. And you also, they're packaged. It's waste and it's expensive. So make your own. And you can make your own taco seasoning with cumin and chili powder and garlic powder, maybe a little smoked paprika, some oregano. And you just blend up those dried herbs and spices, and you have this really good sort of Mexican seasoning. So that's a great way to cut back on sodium. You can use fresh herbs. Like I love cilantro. So if I was making tacos, I would add like tons of fresh cilantro and boom, burst of flavor. Squeeze some lime juice, some citrus on there. Boom, big burst of flavor. So you start building your flavors with dried herbs and spices and fresh herbs. You can add fresh herbs to salads. And when you add them to salads, like mint, parsley, and fresh dill, do not forget about fresh herbs, especially in the summer when you're making beautiful salads, like huge pop of flavor. And then citrus is really great if you zest it. You're just taking off that little bit of an outer layer. And zested citrus is really nice if you're making sauces and salad dressings. And even when you're baking, if you're making like muffins and you add some lemon zest, so good. And then finally, I would recommend getting Diamond Crystal kosher salt. Comes in the big box. And don't get the Morton's. It's the Diamond Crystal. And if you were to look under a microscope at kosher salt, it looks like a snowflake. So when you eat something with a little kosher salt, like let's say you saute up some broccoli or something, you steam it up, and then I like to saute it with some olive oil, a little garlic. Yeah, just a little bit of kosher salt. When you eat that kosher salt, because it's a snowflake, it hits your tongue, and then all these taste buds get ignited. If you were to put regular table salt on that broccoli, if you look under a microscope, table salt looks like a little cube, like these little crystals. So when you eat table salt, that little cube hits your taste buds, and it hits like one taste bud, and then it's gone. So you get more bang for your buck with that kosher salt. It's cleaner tasting, it's fresher tasting. You can use less of it. So Diamond Crystal for cooking. And then when you're baking, I don't mess with baking too much, even though I will tend to cut back on sugar when I'm baking. But if it calls for a quarter teaspoon of regular table salt, then you want to add that. It's more of a science project. But for everyday cooking, I like the Diamond Crystal. Cuts back on sodium, boosts flavor.
Liz, what happens if you have both vegetarians and meat eaters at your table? A reader wants to know how they can cook and please both groups.
Well, I have that. That's been in my life for many, many years. Because my husband, Tim, became a pescatarian many years ago, whereas my boys, eat beef and they eat chicken, although Simon is in college now and up in Vermont, and he and his buddies are like totally off the meat right now. But for years, I would really cook sort of a separate meal for Tim, and then the rest of us would be eating the meat. But then I was like, all right, this is making me crazy. So a couple of tips. I would make like a big lasagna for the boys and for everybody in the family. Big veggie lasagna. In half of it, I would add sauteed ground beef. And the other half, I'd leave it out. So Tim gets the other half. Or I would do those build your own nights that I talked about earlier. So if you're doing like a build your own pizza or a build your own Buddha bowl, then you could certainly have some leftover grilled shrimp in the Buddha bowl in the offerings. You could have some chicken that's left over for the meat eaters, and then lots of other veggies. So the build your own nights really do well. That's like a great thing when you have a vegetarian at the table and everybody else is eating meat. And then the other thing I love to do, especially in the summer, is to grill portobello mushrooms and use those as burgers and top them with all sorts of things. And then everybody feels like, I'm having this hearty burger, but it's vegetarian.
Hey, Liz, we got this question about whole grains. They want to know how we can incorporate it into our diets without being exotic or expensive.
So if you want to kind of expand your whole grains repertoire, I'd recommend a few things. First of all, if you have a Trader Joe's in your area, look for their 10-minute farro or their 10-minute bulgur and their 10-minute barley. These are grains that cook up in no time. And I love them because they sound exotic, but they're inexpensive and they're so easy. So I'll cook up a bunch of those grains and I might add them to Buddha bowls, or I might add them to stir fries. I might add them to soups that I'm making in the winter. So the 10-minute grains are totally the way to go. If you like tabbouleh, a lot of us will buy that pre-made at the store. You can make tabbouleh so easily. Look for whole grain bulgur. Cracked wheat is another term for this. So the whole grain bulgur or cracked wheat, you cook it up and then you create tabbouleh. And tabbouleh is made with chopped parsley and lemon juice and diced cucumbers and tomatoes and olive oil. And I have a recipe on my blog for that, and I will give you a link so you can make tabbouleh, and it sounds awfully fancy, but it's so easy to make. And then you can also look for things like couscous. Comes in a box. You could find the whole wheat couscous, and that cooks up really quickly. And that's a really nice side dish. You know how I said at the top of the show, you want a quarter of your plate to have whole grains or grains. And so a whole wheat couscous would be really nice as that side dish for your family dinner. So nothing exotic, nothing expensive, and then you could just sort of start to expand your repertoire of grains by just kind of snooping around the store and checking out some of those products I just mentioned.
All right, Liz, this is our last question. It's been pretty info-packed. Lots of questions from readers, lots of enthusiasm. I personally relate to this last question because I used to be an athlete in high school. I did triathlon, and it definitely took a toll on your body. You had to have a lot of energy, a lot of fuel. So a reader wants to know about tips for feeding an athlete, especially snacks to take to school.
Yes. Okay. And I can relate because Josh and Simon played soccer all through high school. And so they would go from school to soccer, and it was always this dilemma of what do I pack? So let me give you a few ideas. I am completely obsessed, and Dan will back me up on this, with this new, you know what I'm talking about. All right.
Already know.
You already know. So it is Chicken of the Sea infusions, and it's a new product. It comes in 4 flavors, these little cups, okay? Basil, which is my favorite, lemon and thyme, sun-dried tomato, and Thai chili. So it comes in these little cups with a fork, like a spork, right included at the top of inside the lid. So you open up this little cup, this little pack, and then 20 to 22 grams of protein later, you've had this yummy tuna snack, and it doesn't smell fishy. It doesn't smell like tuna. It is wild-caught tuna. It's so crazy good. All right, so that's a great thing to pack in the backpack. Another thing, if you have like a little ice pack that you put in a soft cooler bag, you can pack Greek yogurt. And the Greek yogurt's great because Greek yogurt has twice as much protein as regular yogurt. You can pack cheese sticks. You can pack ready-made hummus with carrot sticks for dipping, or whole grain crackers. Bush's beans, I can't remember if I mentioned this at the top, they make this ready-made bean dip. And again, beans are a vegetable. They contain protein. You can dip whole grain crackers in there or veggies. And then you've got this bean dip that you can have for that snack. You can pack peanut butter and jelly on whole wheat bread. I used to add like little slices of banana or little slices of apple, Granny Smith apple, to that sandwich. And it adds just a little bit of, extra sweetness, natural sweetness and energy and calories. And then sometimes when I was packing lunches for the boys, and I was packing them a sandwich, I would literally just make a second sandwich and say, that's what you can have before soccer. And then you could buy some of these beverages too that are like ready-made smoothies, that you can get in these individual little cartons, or even milk, good old-fashioned milk. Pack that. Just keep everything cold. And then these are all simple ways to get more protein into your kid's diet. And I do think we need to do a podcast on kid athletes and nutrition. And I'm going to do that in 2019. That's a promise. Are you alive, Dan? Oh,
I am alive. Sorry. Wasn't that the last
That was
question?
Our last question. You're right, Dan. So I really need to say farewell to you.
Okay. I thought we were going to do it like last time where you just lead into that.
Yeah. Well, see, this is what happens when you record a podcast twice. And I might actually have to keep this blooper in the show just so people know how real we are. So, sure. Dan, thank you for recording not once, but twice because of my snafu earlier on. And this was really great having you on the podcast. So thank you for joining us. And thanks for asking me so many great questions.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. I guess you could say that this is my second time on the podcast.
Indeed it is. You could put that on your resume now. I was on
Fantastic.
Liz's Healthy Table, not once, but twice. Thanks, Dan.
Sure thing.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to today's podcast. Remember, I went through a lot of tips and resources and recipes, and so I encourage you to head to lizshealthytable.com/podcast. Show number 50 will have all sorts of links for you in the show notes. If you love the show, share it with a friend, post a review on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.